Hey guys, and welcome to another Friday video. Today we're looking at a video card. This is Nvidia's GeForce FX 5500. I bought it from AliExpress for $28 shipped. We will be using this video card for Windows 98 SE. We will look at the performance in Direct 3D and OpenGL retro games. This graphics card also supports using anti-aliasing and anisotropic filtering, so we will be checking out the performance impact when using those settings. You can use nGlide under Windows 98 to run glide games, so we will see how this video card performs in that aspect. There are rumors, and I have done a video in the past looking at older driver versions. They might give you a speed benefit, so we will also look at that as well as overclocking. So the FX 5500 has a DirectX 9 GPU running at 250 MHz. We have 256 megabytes of DDR memory, so the clock speed is 133 MHz on this model, which makes it effectively 266 MHz because of DDR memory. The interface is AGP up to 8x. We have VGA, DVI, and TV out. This is the system we're using today. It's a Gigabyte motherboard, GA K8VM800M. I flashed the latest BIOS version FD. I load the BIOS defaults, and then with Gigabyte boards press Ctrl F1 to activate some hidden features, and basically I disable some on-board devices that we don't need, like the SATA ports, the audio, the Ethernet, serial ports, parallel ports, and also make sure that the DDR memory speed is running at 200 MHz. We're using an AMD Athlon 64 3000 Plus running at 1.8 GHz. For storage, we're using a Western Digital Caviar Blue with 160 gigabytes together with a SATA 2ID adapter. Now 160 gigabyte is too large for Windows 98, so I'm using Super F-Disk to create a 60 gigabyte partition. And for storage, we're using a standard optical drive. I use this to install Windows 98 as well as the drivers for the sound card. For RAM, initially I used a 256 megabyte module. That's usually enough for Windows 98. However, when testing nGlide, I found that the performance was not that great with 256 megabytes of RAM. So I gave it a try and used a 512 megabyte RAM module, and suddenly the nGlide performance was significantly better. Today's sound card is the Creative Labs Sound Blaster Audigy. We've got a model number here, SB0090. The software installation was fairly straightforward. I'm installing Windows 98 SE off the CD-ROM, and then it's time to install the chipset drivers. And here things got interesting. At first I downloaded the very latest via chipset driver version 5.24a. And when I open the NVIDIA control panel later after installing the NVIDIA driver, it tells me that the bus is PCI, and that's not a good sign. Performance is actually reduced because of that. So I went to the Gigabyte website, downloaded the drivers from their website, which is version 4.55, and suddenly the NVIDIA control panel shows AGP8X, and we're getting better performance. So that just shows you with VIA chipsets, you might want to avoid the very latest driver, or at least have a look in the NVIDIA control panel and see that the bus shows up as AGP and not PCI. We're using the NVIDIA Forceware 5655. I like using that one for GeForce FX cards because it supports the entire range, but later we will also test version 4523, which is amongst the retro community a very popular driver version, and we will find out if the older driver is faster. For the Sound Blaster Audigy, I'm using the installation CD and I'm installing the entire package. We're ending up with VXD drivers version 4.12.01.01.30. There is a driver update available from Creative. You can download it from the website, and that gives us the VXD driver version 4.12.16.21.00. This step is a bit optional, but I installed the unofficial Windows 98 SE Service Pack 3.56, specifically the main updates and system core files. Then you reboot the machine, and then I'm also installing the DirectX 9.0C end user runtime package, because the GeForce FX 5500 is a DirectX 9 GPU, and I want to test nGlide, which requires DirectX 9. And now let's have a look at some benchmarks. 3D Mark 99 Max is first, 13,565 3D marks with a CPU mark score of 44,420. And now let's take a closer look at some games. We're starting with a couple of OpenGL games. GL Quake is first, and at the bottom you can see different resolutions. So we can see how the performance changes as we increase the resolution, starting with 162 at 800 by 600. Then the performance drops to 98 FPS at 1024 by 768. And at 1280 by 1024, we're getting 59 FPS. We can see a similar trend in Quake 2. The higher the resolution, the less performance. But even at 1280 by 960, we can play at 66 FPS. Quake 3 fares a little bit better. That game is just really optimized. It got a huge focus back in the day. And even at 1280 by 1024, we can play at 73 FPS. Now we're going to have a look at some direct 3D games. Expendable is next. This game is a little bit more demanding. At 1280 by 1024, we're getting 58 FPS, just short of that 60 FPS benchmark. Draken is quite a demanding game. Even at 1024 by 768, we're getting only 58 FPS. So this is a game where you might have to play at 800 by 600 or reduce some of the graphics settings. Now, what about anti-aliasing and anisotropic filtering? So here we're taking a closer look at Quake 3. The blue line is with anisotropic filtering set to 0. The orange line has anisotropic filtering set to 8x. And then as we go from the left to the right, we're cranking up anti-aliasing. And we can see two things. We can see that anti-aliasing has a huge impact on performance. Now, the resolution that I'm testing here is 1024 by 768. So we can see anti-aliasing has a huge impact on performance, whereas anisotropic filtering, not so much. The higher the resolution, the less impact it actually has. So this is a setting that you can actually leave on 8x by default and use it for every game. And I did the same thing with Expendable. Blue line is without anisotropic filtering. The orange line has 8x anisotropic filtering enabled. Once again, we can see how anti-aliasing has a huge impact on performance. What happened with 8x AA and 8x anisotropic filtering? The driver just ignored anti-aliasing and ran at full speed, so that's why there is no result. But once again, we can see that anisotropic filtering, the performance impact is fairly minimal, so you can just leave that enabled and get better visuals. But anti-aliasing, you will have to do a little bit of benchmarking depending on what game you're running and if you can run that game with decent performance with an anti-aliasing enabled. So here we have Tomb Raider 2. This is the GOG version and it's configured with 1024 by 768 and 32-bit colors. This is a game locked at 30 FPS. It's got an engine cap. So I configured the NVIDIA driver to use 4x anti-aliasing, 8x anisotropic filtering and VSync enabled. And yeah, the game is locked at 30 FPS. It looks good. The jaggies are removed. The ground textures looking into the distance are nice and sharp. And it's also very smooth without any tearing. So this is where the FX 5500 really shines in OpenGL and Direct 3D games that are a little bit older, where you can crank up those eye candy features and you get really good visuals. And now it gets interesting. We will compare the driver version 5655 with the older 4523. So the 4523 drivers are very much recommended in the retro community, but out of the box, they do not support the FX 5500, but they do support the FX 5200. So in order to install the older 4523 drivers, you run the installer first, so it unpacks the files, and then you go through Device Manager and you manually choose the FX 5200. And now let's have a look at the benchmarks. We can see in 3D Mark 99 Max, the performance increases with the older drivers. And we can see the same trend when we're looking at all the games. These games are tested at 1024 by 768, and you can see across the board, every single one of these games performs faster with the older 4523 driver. And that's the driver I would recommend if you're getting this card. You will get a small performance boost and maybe even better compatibility. However, I did not notice any compatibility issues with the driver version 5655. But this just shows, even with a fast CPU, older NVIDIA drivers can be faster. The GeForce FX range is the final lineup from NVIDIA that supports two important legacy features for retro games. The first one is called 8-bit paletted textures. You can run the Final Fantasy VII demo and it will check your GPU compatibility. And here we can see the FX 5500 is compatible with this feature. The second feature is called Table Fog, and you can try a game like Thief 2. I'm using the GOG version, and it has an option here to enable fogging. And this, I've been told, does not work on Radeon cards, for example. You will not see fog in the game. Now, please tell me which level has fog so I can test that. That would be interesting. But on the FX 5500, this is a feature fully supported. Now, what about 3dfx Voodoo support? So, nGlide can be used under Windows 98. It installs just like on more modern machines. It does need a DirectX 9 GPU and also DirectX 9 installed, and it will translate the glide calls into Direct 3D. And this does work under Windows 98 without any issues. However, performance is interesting. So I tried a few games. Here we have Clive Barker's Undying, and we're also looking at Unreal. And you can see I'm gonna maybe put the pictures side by side between running with the glide, with the nGlide render and the Direct 3D option. In Clive Barker's Undying, the difference is really obvious. It performs much better with the native Direct 3D. For some reason on this machine, nGlide just doesn't perform very well. Next up, I ran Unreal. It's got a built-in benchmark, and I'm getting around 24 FPS at 640 by 480, but also at 1024 by 768. And that tells me that it's not really the video card that's holding things back. It might actually be the CPU. Talking about API support, here we have Screamer 4x4, and this game supports Glide, Direct 3D, and OpenGL. So I went into the options, configured it for 1024 by 768 and 32-bit colors, comparing Direct 3D with OpenGL. And the NVIDIA cards are really strong with OpenGL. And this shows in this game, we are getting a higher performance with the OpenGL render option. So keep that in mind. If you have a game that supports multiple APIs, try OpenGL. It might perform faster on this video card. Now, a lot of games, thanks to the efforts by the community, are receiving new API upgrades. Here we have Rune. This is the GOG version. If you go to the extras section, you can download the legacy version and run it on a Windows 98 Retro PC. And for this game, there are modern Direct 3D 9 and OpenGL renders available. However, on a Retro PC, the performance was actually quite bad, and I believe this is to do with the video card not being modern enough or fast enough. And I will put the comparisons on the screen, comparing the built-in Direct 3D render that the game comes with, comparing it to the modern Direct 3D 9 render option. You can clearly see the performance difference. So here, going with the modern API upgrades might not be the best option. And next up, I had a look at overclocking. The NVIDIA driver lets you change the clock speeds inside the driver. However, despite testing the overclock and everything looking fine, the performance didn't budge. It just stayed consistent, no matter what memory and GPU core clock speed are configured. So I installed River Tuner, and the same issue. Didn't matter what clock speed I set, I got the exact same performance. So my conclusion is that these FX 5500 cards coming out from China might be a little bit different, and maybe they don't support overclocking at all, which is unfortunate. The RAM, I believe, is rated at 166 megahertz, and that could have given us a little performance boost, but I wasn't able to overclock it. Maybe if you're really keen, you can modify the BIOS and change the clock speed values. but that wasn't something I was willing to try out. So guys, what's my take on these AGP FX 5500 cards from AliExpress? So in general, there's no such thing as a bad video card, only a bad price. And for $28 shipped, I think this is not a bad deal. We're getting decent performance. It's not outstanding, but it's fast enough for even some of the more modern games to play at 1024 by 768 with all details maxed out, and you should be getting 60 FPS. Older games, you should be able to play at 1280 by 1024 or even 1600 by 1200. The video card is fast enough with older games to play around with anti-aliasing and anisotropic filtering. Especially anisotropic filtering has a minimal performance impact. I would just leave that on 8x for all the games. It will make them look quite a bit nicer. It is also the last NVIDIA generation to support 8-bit paletted textures and table fog, which is of interest for those few specific games that take advantage of these features. The FX 5500 can be used with the 4523 drivers for good compatibility with older games and also increased performance, but you have to install the driver manually through Device Manager. Like most NVIDIA cards, OpenGL performance is excellent, sometimes faster than the Direct 3D option in games. So that's something to look inside the graphics options if you can choose different API. Unfortunately, I didn't have any luck with overclocking. That is really unfortunate. I would have loved to extract some more performance out of this card. Also, N-Glide wasn't really usable, maybe with really old games like Turok 3D, but not with some of the more demanding games like Unreal or Rune. You're better off using the built-in Direct 3D render options. We also found that upgrading the renders to a more modern version might not work out very well. Could be because the machine is just too slow or because this video card is too basic and they use some more advanced features. The FX range is known to not be very strong with DirectX 9 performance, so maybe that's what's happening here. We have VGA, DVI and TV output, so lots of options to configure displayed devices. The VGA signal quality is pretty decent, and although I haven't tested DOS performance, it should be fairly decent. I've been using a FX 5200 in my main DOS PC for a long time, and yeah, DOS performance has been great, no complaints there. So guys, there you have it. We had a look at the GeForce FX 5500, the AGP version that's readily available on places such as AliExpress, maybe also on eBay. And I'm quite happy with what this card has to offer. It's not perfect, but it offers a little bit of everything. And yeah, you've seen the performance. We had a look at the driver options. We checked out N-Glide, overclocking, tested different APIs. So I think there is a lot of good stuff about this video card. But as always, let me know, what do you think about this video card? Is this something you could see yourself using in your Windows 98 retro gaming PC? Or do you go with something more authentic, maybe a 3DFX Voodoo card? Always eager to hear from you. I read every single comment. You might not get a reply, but I do read every single comment. And let me know what other things you want us to look at on the channel. We will definitely check out the Sound Blaster Audigy very soon. This is also a really cool Windows 98 sound card and has some half decent DOS compatibility as well. So thank you for watching. Give it a like, leave a comment, share the video with your friends, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and I shall see you soon with another one.